The Boy from Yesterday, Chapter 6, Through the Eyes of Wonder. Tom awoke extra early with the thought of Sam on his mind as if he had never slept. He splashed some water on his face at the basin and got dressed. He headed downstairs and outside toward the barn and rushed through his usual chores. As soon as he could, he checked in with Uncle Nate, who said something about new shipments at the store as Tom walked off in the direction of Sam's house. He kept checking his pocket watch, which was a nice watch because it had been Tom's father's. It was engraved on the inside cover, "From his mother to his father. To Emmanuel, love Beatrice, April 4th, 1869, as a wedding present." All of that was a long time ago and seemed even longer, as every minute seemed like an eternity that Tom walked even the short distance from Uncle Nate's farmhouse to the Beckons' house. When he got to Sam's house, some of the farmhands were doing their chores, whispering to one another in hushed tones. Tom didn't let himself in this time. Instead, he knocked on the door and was quietly let in by a spinster aunt of Sarah's, Clara, whom he had met last Christmas. He bounded up the stairs in a few leaps. Sarah and two older people Tom didn't know, a man and a woman, were standing at the foot of Sam's bedside, huddled together and talking quietly. Dr. Hurd was there now, standing at the head of the bed. He held Sam's wrist, taking his pulse, and looking at his own pocket watch. Sam lay on the bed in the same position Tom had seen him the afternoon before, on his back, hair sweaty and matted back, asleep, mouth half open. Just as he appeared in the bedroom doorway, all eyes, except Sam's, turned to Tom with a blank stare. Dr. Hurd looked at Sarah silently with a frown and a brief shake of his head as he read his watch. She turned and walked toward Tom, her hands outstretched to take his. The man and woman turned away to look back at Sam. Dr. Hurd felt Sam's forehead and frowned, then started looking for something in his medical bag. Sarah took Tom's hands in hers in the doorway, slightly smiling. "Tom, dear," she started, and just as Tom was about to say something, she stopped him with a firm look. "It's not a good time, Tom. Sam is good and bad. We don't know. There's a problem with his leg, and he has a fever and chills. It's swollen, and Dr. Hurd is trying to keep him stable. He suggests some homeopathy, and we're praying that it does some good. We just have to let him rest now, and let nature take its course, and pray. Dr. Hurd is helping us all he can now, and we all just need to wait and pray. I suggest you go home and get some rest. You still look tired yourself. We'll be all right, I'm sure." Tom looked at her, half pityingly and half suspiciously, like he was just told a lot but told nothing at the same time, giving her the same blank stare the others had all given him just a moment ago. All Tom could muster to say, despite the flurry and noise in his head of all the things he could say, or wanted to say, was, "Yes, ma'am. All my prayers are with you all, ma'am." Tom broke off, searched his mind for the right words, but just came out with, "All my prayers, ma'am, are with all of you." He took one last look past Sarah's shoulder to see Sam's face, which was pale and wet, with a few strands of hair in his face, and now a heavy stubble of beard. He turned away as Sarah squeezed his hands and turned back to the others at the bed. Tom left the house somewhat stunned that he was being turned away, but that wasn't unusual in families when someone was especially sick and the family was sitting vigil. Panicked, desperate, Tom walked toward town, not thinking of exactly where to go, except perhaps to the store and catch up on some chores he knew he had to do for Uncle Nate with that new shipment. Tom looked at his watch again and saw it was nearly 10:45 a.m. He suddenly remembered his appointment with Zellar. Tom didn't want to see anyone for mere company, but he remembered some vague words Zellar had about having something that might help Sam, and he searched his mind to try to remember what he said. He took the card from his pocket and saw the address again, 666.5 Casa Grande, which was a very small, short side street off Main Street that Tom didn't go near much, but was only a few blocks from the store, off Main and Concord, near some other streets that were narrow with dark alleys between them. When he turned the corner of Casa Grande Street, it was empty of passers-by. What few homes were on the street showed no signs of life. Then there were no stores. Tom walked and noted the numbers of the houses. He passed 646, 6:57, and was coming near the end of the street when he looked up and saw a small alcove with iron gates across it and the strangest ironwork above. An ornate decoration of 2 dragons' heads were in silhouette in the sculpted black iron, surrounded by curves that looked part like leaves and part like the pointy fingers of hands moving in every direction around the dragons' heads, capped by a sharp fleur-de-lis ornament. Next to the gate, on a gray stone wall, more iron spelled out numbers, 666 and a half, but the 2 and the 1/2 was crooked. Tom pulled down on the heavy iron handle of the gate and pushed it open. He entered the courtyard, which looked dry and neglected, with dried leaves and some brown grass between the slate pavers on the ground. Before him stood dark wood double doors, probably walnut, Tom thought, with ornate carvings of animals, dragons, wolves, deer, and branches of trees in various shapes of stars and suns and moons. Next to the door, jutting out perpendicular to the wall, was another ornate ironwork, a vine of leaves and branches seemingly held in the mouth of a wrought iron vulture, and at the end of the branches was a big brass bell and a thick red silk cord that dangled beneath it, with a small brass ball at the end of the cord. Tom checked his watch from his pocket. 10:59 a.m. He reached up to the red cord and pulled 3 times, ringing the bell. Nothing. No sound around him as the peal of the bell faded. For a moment, Tom wondered if Zellar was even home. Then he heard a click, and the right-hand door of the double door slowly opened, but it revealed nothing. It was dark inside. Tom approached the door and walked just inside, peering into the dark entry hall. He stepped farther in and looked up to see a man who looked like a butler, dressed in a black and white uniform like a tuxedo, with a bright bald head and a little red mustache curled up at the ends, and bright eyes staring right at Tom, or, as Tom thought, staring right through him. A bit startled, Tom took off his cap and nodded to the man. "Good morning, sir. I'm Tom Flannery, and I have an appointment to see Mr. Zellar, sir." Tom stood straight and smiled brightly at the man. The man, still holding the doorknob on the inside with his left hand, just continued to stare at Tom and said nothing, and didn't move. Tom paused before saying, "Tom Flannery, sir. Zellar is expecting me?" Just then Tom heard a little bell tinkle behind him, and he turned to see a wooden box about the size of a shoebox sitting on a shelf. On top of the box was a figure of a brass wizard automaton in a long gown with a red rope belt and wearing a pointed gold hat, who held a staff in his right hand. Tom heard a click in the box, and the little figure turned in one move and swung the staff on the ground as he was standing on the top of the box, striking a plate and lighting the staff, which Tom now realized was a match affixed to the little wizard's hand. The figure turned beside him and used the staff or match to light a candle, which was affixed in a holder next to the figure. The little wizard figure then turned back, faced Tom, and froze again. The match burned out, leaving the candle to burn and give more light to the little entry hall. Tom turned back to the butler and realized that butler wasn't a man at all, but a fully life-size automaton, complete in butler's costume. Tom stared at the shining glass eyes of this amazing figure, which suddenly blinked and then turned and shut the door behind him, then stood at attention with his white-gloved hands poised elegantly in front of him. "That will be all, Jensen," Tom heard a voice behind him say. "Tom, do come in." Tom turned and saw Zellar, in a slightly less formal suit, but still an elegant one, standing farther inside the doorway. Tom didn't see where he had come in from, but Zellar shook Tom's hand, smiled warmly, and then turned and reached toward an oil lamp on a little table behind him and turned up the wick, revealing more of a small sitting room, nicely appointed, but not too unusual, at least not as unusual as what Tom had seen so far. "Your command of time is impressive, as I expected," Zellar said. "Prompt as sunrise." "Yes, sir," said Tom. "It's an honor to see you again, sir." "May I show you in? Perhaps you would like a tour of my collection," Zellar said. Tom looked around the small room but didn't see any collection of anything. He said, Yes, sir. Anyway, somewhat puzzled and just a bit ill at ease, Zeller turned and waved his hand at a seemingly blank wall, which Tom thought was an odd gesture. He was starting to think that Zeller was not only the most fascinating man he'd ever met, but also the strangest. Then a panel on the blank wall parted, revealing another room behind it, and Zeller motioned Tom to follow him. "This," said Zeller, "is my workshop and my collection of items procured from throughout the world." As he said so, he turned a switch on the wall, and small electric lights turned on throughout the room, near the ceiling, illuminating a sight which bedazzled Tom. Tom wasn't used to seeing electric lights in most homes. Here, there were maybe 6 or 8 of them in various parts of the room. As his eyes adjusted to the amber glare of the electric lights, dozens of colors and shapes mesmerized him of what he saw on display, in glass cases, on tabletops, on shelves mounted on every wall, or things suspended from the ceiling. There were mostly figures of people, heads, puppet-looking figures, masks, an ornate bird cage, a little doll that looked like a Turkish boy in a colorful silk costume, complete with velvet vest and cap, perched on a shining brass trapeze suspended from the ceiling in the corner. On a tabletop sat a bust of a fortune-teller carved from dark wood, wearing an elaborate Egyptian headdress, and had hands extending from a box beneath it, holding a small crystal ball. A little white teacup sat on another table with a painted face on it that looked like a lady's, with big red lips that looked like they were about to speak. Leaned up against that table was a cane, but the head of it was that of a man, balding with a big monocle over its left eye, and again big lips that looked like they could speak. At another table, a life-size dark man in a white satin turban pinned by a big ruby-red brooch sat staring darkly over a long, thin, black mustache, wearing an elaborate red velvet cape with gray fur collar, with life-size arms lying on either side of a chessboard in front of him. Tom almost forgot Zeller standing at the passageway and was drawn into the room, his eyes wide with trying to take in the wonders he was seeing, too many to fathom. He moved toward the man at the chessboard almost in a trance, peering at the dark glass eyes of the man, almost expecting the figure to speak. "That's what I call the Turk," Zeller said. "When he's operated, he plays chess. As an automaton, of course. He's not real. But he does win, most of the time." Tom wasn't sure whether he actually said fascinating or merely thought it in his head. He turned to see more of the room, yet felt the Turk was still watching him. In the corner, in a case affixed to the wall, a small figurine that looked like a Chinese wizard stood in an enclosure of brass pillars decorated with small green and red jewels, with a little table in front of him, with a black velvet tablecloth decorated in gold fringe, and 3 little gold stars on its front. He held a brass cone in his hand, as if he were passing the cone over the top of the table. He had a long Fu Manchu mustache and a gold and red brocade jacket. Tom went over for a closer look. "That is a miniature conjurer," Zeller said, as he moved across the room toward the figure and reached behind the figure's enclosure for a moment. Just then the little figure began to move. He raised his head and his hands began to sweep over the top of the little table. As he did this, each time the brass cone passed the center of the table, a little object appeared. First an apple, then that disappeared. Then a little bluebird, and that was gone too. Then an orange. A strange, haunting music box melody played from somewhere inside the mechanism. Zeller reached behind the box again, and the figure became still. Another figure stood nearby in a similar enclosure, this one all wood, and the figure wore a light blue satin suit like a Chinaman. He had a gray goatee and a long black wand in his right hand. The little table in front of him was held up on the back of the head and the tip of the tail of a creature like a gargoyle, with the head of a man, a devilish head with big pointed ears and bright sharp white ivory teeth as it grinned, and webbed feet on the body of a dog. Zeller again approached the figure, activated some unseen switch, and once again an odd music box tune played. The little figure came to life, tapped his wand on the table, and a little blue wooden ball appeared. He rhythmically tapped the table again, and another ball appeared, this one red. He tapped it again, and a green ball appeared. He then waved the little wand across the tops of the balls, and smoke appeared around the little table. By the time the figure regained its original posture, the little puff of smoke had faded, and the balls on the table disappeared with it. Tom stood with his eyes wide, not realizing his mouth was hanging wide open. "Don't scare the boy," a high-pitched voice said from somewhere nearby. Tom turned and saw a glass case with the disembodied head of an elaborate red devil, with big brown glass eyes that glistened in the light, staring right at him. The head stood on a brass pike to display. The figure's head had big gold earrings dangling in each of its huge, pointed red ears, and also at the top of its right ear. 2 white horns protruded from the top of the red head, and bright white teeth grinned. A little dark blue jester's collar was wrapped at the figure's neck at the top of the base, and each part of the jester's collar was capped with a big brass ball. "He's your guest," the figure continued, with its grinning mouth moving in synchronization with his words. Tom smiled nervously, his heart bracing at the sight of a big red devil's head automaton grinning at him and somehow speaking like he had a phonograph hidden inside him. But how had the figure known what to say? What if a woman had been visiting? It was these kinds of puzzles that made Tom fascinated but a little uneasy inside this room of mystical treasures. Zellar said nothing, but excitedly urged Tom toward another little dark wooden box on top of a table. Zellar opened the box to reveal a little doll standing inside it who wore a bright satin turban, a light blue silk jacket, a white shirt with little jewels for buttons, a bright red cummerbund which matched the turban, and little brown trousers. Zellar explained, "This is Amir. He will disappear." With that, Zellar closed the box and immediately reopened it. But Amir was gone. "But in magic, that which disappears does tend to reappear," Zellar said, opening a much smaller black lacquer box across the table. As he did, the little figure of Amir laid peacefully in the box, this time showing his pointed-toe red slippers, which matched his turban. Tom forgot all about the creepy devil's head and laughed at the innocent little Amir in repose, looking comfortable in the new box, lined with a rich white satin. Tom laughed and looked at Zellar. "This is amazing, Zellar!" He paused for a moment, truly grateful to Zellar for letting him see the inside of the lair of a great magician. He realized he was smiling broadly at the delightful sights, but as he realized this, his face fell, and remembered where he had been just before, just this morning, and thought of Sam. "What's wrong, Tom?" Zellar said, frowning slightly but with a look of genuine concern. "My friend, sir, Sam, the one I told you about, I visited him this morning. He's very sick. I don't know if Dr. Hurd can help. One minute Sam seems all right and just, I'd say, resting, and the next he looks pale and not well at all. This worries me, sir." "Come, sit," Zellar said, and motioned across the room to a table with 2 chairs and a bright silver tea service on it that Tom hadn't noticed before. Had it been there and he just didn't see it, or had it not been there? Tom thought that the table was bare when they walked in, because he thought for a moment it was strange that a table should be bare when all the other tables and surfaces were filled with the most wondrous things. Still, Zellar poured tea into small, fine china cups of a deep red color with a gold trim. "Go on," said Zellar. Tom sat, and Zellar sat beside him, his chair pulled away from the table a bit. Tom explained to Zellar the situation with Sam. He told of how Tom's parents had died some years earlier, and how Uncle Nate had taken him in. Zellar listened attentively, looked into Tom's eyes, and teared up a bit when Tom described the loss of his parents, and his worry about Sam, and his fear of losing yet another loved one. "You must understand what you can do and what you cannot do," Zellar gently said. "You can only control so much. You must have the courage to change the things you can, the grace to accept the events you cannot prevent, and be wise in the discernment of the one above the other. In my travels I have encountered many great things. This is how I cultivated my collection. There were bazaars, private collectors, my fellow magicians, some who didn't speak English, and we did some sort of trade. Slowly, as Zeller continued speaking to him, Tom's blood ran cold as he saw Zeller's head in the dim light of the room begin to float off the high, starched white collar of his shirt and float away from his neck, his head appearing several feet beside his body, hanging in the air as he spoke. Tom's eyes got wider as Zeller's decapitated head moved farther from his body. Then Tom leaned forward and frowned, interrupting Zeller mid-sentence. "Now what the Sam Hill? You cut that out," Tom said, surprising himself at his indignation at his gracious host. "All this conjuring and illusion and whatnot, when my friend lies sick not just a mile from here, what am I to do? I can't help my friend with devils and potions and whatnot." Zeller's head seemed to regain its proper place on his body in the blink of an eye, and instead of being angry at his young guest's outburst, the older man smiled warmly, then squinted his eyes at Tom. "I promised you a reward for your help in saving my hat," Zeller said, "and I believe what I shall give you can help you find the help you need, in its own special way. But are you sure that's what you want?" "I swear by all that's holy that's what I want," Tom said. "If you have a way to help me, to help Sam, please tell me. I'll do anything." "Anything," Zeller said, without emotion, not really asking as much as observing. Tom stared at Zeller, not knowing who this man was or what he was up to, but desperate to learn from this mysterious, wise, well-traveled, and obviously wealthy man what he could possibly do to help. Zeller pulled a small black velvet box from his coat pocket. "A cherished gift was given to me by the great Faker of Ava in Burma, chief of staff of conjurers to his sublime greatness the Nunca of Aristophe," Zeller said as he held the box closed and looked at Tom sternly. "It has been known to have magic of its own." "I don't see how that could be so. What is it? How does it work?" asked Tom. "It is a ring," Zeller said, opening the little black velvet box to reveal the most magnificent thing Tom had ever seen. It was a ring of bright gold, but on it was the profile of the head of a dragon in silver, with gold ears and a bright red ruby for the eye. It sparkled even in the light of the dim room, reflecting the electric lights. As Tom gazed at the fascinating piece, the ruby of the dragon's eye flashed, as if it were winking at him. "And it is yours, Tom," said Zeller, who pulled the ring from the little box with one hand and took Tom's hand with the other, and gently slid the ring on Tom's left ring finger. "Its power, according to the Faker of Ava, is said to be great, but it has its limitations, which he carefully taught me at the time. It cannot bring the dead back to life. It cannot bring objects to exist that do not. It cannot give you strength above all men. It cannot bring riches. It cannot, on its own, heal the sick." Tom looked lovingly at the beautiful ring on his finger and looked at Zeller. "Then what does it do?" Tom asked. "It is said to bring help to those who need it, and more precisely when they need it," Zeller explained in a professorial, factual tone. "Its use is said to be bittersweet, for there can be no reward without sacrifice." Zeller smiled compassionately. Zeller changed his tone of voice and said more brightly, "It also has the power to reverse time by approximately 10 seconds. I'll show you," he said, and he took a small scrap of paper out of his pocket, along with the stump of a pencil. He placed them on the table. "Write down a word on the paper, but do not show me, and place the paper face down on the table." Tom took the paper and pencil and wrote something on the paper and placed it face down. Zeller quickly glanced at the word on the paper. Tom smiled and said, "That's no trick. You looked at it." Zeller reached out for Tom's hand and gave the ring a little twist. Suddenly the scene changed, and Tom was back writing on the piece of paper, turning it face down on the table again. "Telephone," Zeller said immediately, staring blankly at Tom. Tom looked at Zeller, perplexed. "Yes, how did you know that's the word I wrote? You didn't even look at it." "Actually, I did. You just don't remember. I twisted the ring in reverse time a few seconds." Tom shook his head and smiled, not entirely believing in Zellar's explanation, but also not knowing how Zellar guessed the word he wrote. "I suppose so," said Tom, still confused at the powers of the ring, but admiring its design as Tom waved his hand for the ring to catch the light so that the dragon's intricate beauty could be seen in more detail. Zellar continued as if he had just remembered an important point. "And it must be accompanied by this," he said, as he reached into the same coat pocket, this time producing a little scroll with diamond-shaped gold brass ends. He unfurled the brown paper scroll and saw some words in English on a deep amber, stiff papyrus sheet, but Tom couldn't see the words. Zellar rolled the scroll up again and handed it to Tom. "Now, dear Tom, you must remember what I will tell you now." Tom took the little scroll and held it tightly in his hand. He nodded at Zellar, looking closely at him, making a point to pay attention and remember what Zellar would say. "Be warned, Tom. These words that activate the magic of this ring can be used only once. Once, they activate the magic and the events that will transpire. Then the second time the words are spoken, it will reverse the events of the first. That will deplete the magic available to that use forever." Zellar bowed his head solemnly and put his hand over Tom's affectionately, but avoided Tom's eyes. "I must prepare for my theater appearance now, Tom. You should go." Tom stared, not quite believing what he was hearing. "But the magic that you do, all of this, it's just trickery, right? It's all tricks on your mind? It's not, well, real magic, is it? I mean, there's no such thing as that. Is there?" Zellar stared back frozen. "Do you believe there is?" Tom looked down and thought a moment and then replied, "Well, I reckon it was a type of magic the first time I saw electric lights, and then when I got our first telegram, that was something else too. And hearing Mrs. Butt's niece on the telephone at the store, things change so much around here and new things all the time. I reckon that's a kind of magic." Zellar remained frozen, intent on his gaze at Tom. "And if you were to see other, as you say, new things, you might consider that a sort of magic as well?" Tom nodded. "You never know what they'll think of next. It's just that I need something to help Sam. Electric lights can't do that, or any of these things here. Beautiful things, but..." Zellar nodded back, then smiled brightly. "Then you should experiment. Use the ring. Perhaps it might bring you luck. We could all use some of that now and again, can't we?" He smiled reassuringly. Tom smiled at the ring and the notion that the gift, however mysterious its magic was, however obscure, even however real or not, perhaps faith in the ring would bring him the kind of luck that he and Sam needed so badly. Even if it was all some kind of trick to cheer Tom up, he was grateful to Zellar for the entertainment and for the gift of a handsome piece of jewelry. In any case, Tom knew he would cherish it forever as a souvenir of his visit to this marvelous workshop of the mysterious stage magician. "Yes, sir," Tom laughed. "How can I ever thank you?" "I thank you, Tom," said Zellar, "for it was you who rescued my cherished hat from a most assured destruction by the train. I hope to see you at the theater. You must see the show when you get back to... when your situation returns to normal. And Tom," he said with gravity but sincerity, "good luck with your friend. As with your skill in saving my hat, I'm sure you will help him, all in good time, if that is indeed what you choose to do." Tom was a bit perplexed at that last statement, but he didn't question Zellar, for Zellar had already exited through a small door in the back of the room. As he left, the electric lights went out, the panel opened again behind Tom, which led back to the entry hall. Tom moved toward the entry hall, and again Jensen, the automaton butler, opened the door. Holding tightly to the scroll and holding the ring tightly on his finger in a fist, he exited the house. He walked back through the front garden gate and out to the street, walking toward the general store, his eyes adjusting to the bright daylight, excited to tell Uncle Nate he was planning something to help Sam. But as he gave it another thought, Tom realized he wasn't even sure what that something was yet.